John McMullen appearing via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Like all guests of the show, NFL Draft, April 26th, 27th, and 28th. You can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN. The Eagles own the 32nd pick in that draft, and we'll obviously dive into the draft and more NFL news and notes now with Johnny Mack here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. John, how are you, pal?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
You got it, pal, and a lot of football as the draft is closing in, but some other things to get into. Some sources out there saying that the teams around the league now don't think that OBJ will be traded. We talked a lot about the Giants yesterday and their draft situation, but where do you stand on Odell Beckham and his future in New York?
Well, they're asking a lot, so that's part of it, and it's difficult to get value for a player that talented. So it comes down to the fact that the Giants think he could be a professional on the field, off the field, and obviously if he can, he'd be very, very helpful. That you're talking about, if not the best receiver in football, certainly in the top 3 or 4 when he's completely healthy and he's ready to go and he's playing on all cylinders. So it can only help from a football standpoint. And the reality is they're not going to be able to get 2 first-round picks, and he showed up for the beginning of off-season work, which I think was at least a bit of a surprise from the Giants' perspective, because they didn't think he would be there at least earlier in the process. So I think from their standpoint, they saw that as a very good sign and a potential to get a long-term deal done, and I think that's why you see a little change in the narrative coming out of East Rutherford in the fact that he seems willing to work with the Giants. And if that's the case, well, you don't want to give up on a talent like that.
How much was it that Brandon Cooks got traded to the Rams? Do you look at the Rams were the partner for the Giants?
Yeah, that's part of it. And there's no doubt the Rams were probably the team most interested in making a move, and they went in another direction because the price was too steep. And Cooks is a very good receiver. He's not OBJ, and but the fact is they're not going to acquire them both, so the Rams are out of it, and that shrinks the pool somewhat, as I said. And I don't know how many are in a pool to offer up 2 first-round picks. I think a ton of teams would like Odell Beckham Jr., but not for that stipend, because, you know, the second part of that, which I always remind people, and people tend to forget, you not only have to give up 2 first-round picks, then you got to sign him to an extension and pay him. And he's probably going to be, if not the highest paid receiver in football, certainly amongst the top 2 or 3. So that's a lot to do for one player.
Yeah, John. So if you were the Giants, what is the minimum you would take to pull the trigger? I mean, if draft day comes and someone calls them, is there something that you think Dave Gettleman says, you know what, on second thoughts, I would be willing to take that?
Well, I think if you get a top 5 pick, you know, some people have speculated Cleveland would be interested at number 4. I don't think that's the case, but I certainly would pull the trigger there. And you have to think seriously. If the issues continued, you would think seriously about a mid-first round pick. But as I said, one of them's off the table because Beckham came in for conditioning work, at least the beginning, and that's a positive sign.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com at JF McMullen. Dez Bryant news, they met today, or will meet, I should say, on Friday to discuss his contract situation. And it looks like they don't want him at his $16.5 million number, but they also don't want to just cut him. So where does this Dez Bryant, Jerry Jones, Dallas Cowboys story take us? This one could be interesting.
Yeah, and it's really only interesting because Jerry Jones likes him and has a tremendous amount of loyalty towards him. Just about any other organization would have cut ties. I mean, he's just not a player worth a $16.5 million cap hit. He once was. We've talked about it a number of times. He hasn't been the same physically since he got hurt a couple of years ago. And what was a top 5 receiver is now a mediocre receiver, and you just can't carry that cap value on a player like that. So I think from Jerry's perspective, he hopes to have a conversation. He hopes to keep him at a far more reasonable number. And I think a lot of it comes down to ego and how much less Dez Bryant is willing to take from, not only the perspective of Dallas, but remember, if he does get to the open market, he's not going to get paid a lot either. So it's one of those things we talk about with veteran players who've had a lot of success in a particular city. It seems difficult for them to take less in that city, but the grass isn't going to be greener on the other side of the fence because Dez Bryant might have a big name, but he's no longer a big-time receiver.
Yeah, and, he's a guy that you think it's the injuries, what has been the downfall of him? Is it, it seems that he hasn't adapted to the style of play in the league as of recently, and then he really hasn't come back from a lot of the injuries that he has had.
I think it's mainly the injury. He's lost his explosion. Yeah. He's not the same guy physically. He had a Jones fracture in his foot. He's just not the same. And he was never, a guy, and there aren't, scouts will tell you, there aren't a ton of players, receivers in this league that run great routes or sort of Marvin Harrison types that are just perfect route runners. And Dez was never a great route runner. So once you lose the physical advantage, and he had a big one because he's one of the biggest receivers in football who could also run and jump and was a physical freak. He no longer is that because of the injury. And now you have a big lumbering guy who can't run routes. And that's why he doesn't get separation, and that's why his numbers have crashed.
And he also has a huge cap number, so that the Cowboys really can't, help him out on that side, on the offensive side of the ball.
No, I mean, if you're going to get a $16.5 million cap hit, you have to be a star player. That's just the bottom line. And he once was, and that's why he got this contract, but he isn't now, and that's the harsh reality of the league.
No doubt. We'll see. Keep an eye on 2 high-profile NFC East wide receivers, Odell Beckham, Dez Bryant, as the draft comes along. We'll see if trade scenarios come up on draft day for those 2 guys. John McMullen at JF McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. We talked a little draft yesterday. We got into some of the quarterback stuff. Before we dive back into that, it's interesting because the Patriots seemingly are in the market for a quarterback. Tom Brady is, 40 now. He might give it up at some point here soon. They traded Jimmy Garoppolo away. But could you see them taking a quarterback maybe in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't shock me. I still doubt it. I tend not to believe. They're still in win-now mode, and they should be. And you do. It's something you have to weigh, and it's one of the most difficult parts, obviously, of the NFL when you're putting together teams, because you have to try to win now if you're a significant contender like the Patriots, but you also have to think about tomorrow. Otherwise, when Tom Brady does leave, you're going to fall off the table. So I do think they want a sort of heir apparent, and it would have been great for them if it worked out to where they could go directly from Brady to Garoppolo, but the timing didn't work out. So they have to get another quarterback into that organization. But, I mean, they were in the Super Bowl last year. They obviously lost to the Eagles. It wasn't Tom Brady's fault. He was phenomenal. And they play in the AFC side, and let's be honest, the NFC is the one that has all the teams making moves, and on paper looks like they have all the powerhouses. So at least from that perspective, the Patriots look like they have a pretty easy time of it again to get to the Super Bowl. And I think you need a player who can help you this year more than the heir apparent to Tom Brady.
John, when you look at these teams in the back end of the first round to the mid end of the first round, the Baltimore, San Diego, Arizona, which one of these teams have you heard the most about moving up to get a quarterback? Maybe not the likes of Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield, but maybe that bottom half of Lamar Jackson or Mason Rudolph.
Well, I think you are going to see, and I mentioned to Mike and Pete yesterday when you weren't there, Deshaun, I think you're going to see 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. So I think, somebody's going to reach a little bit for a guy like Mason Rudolph. I don't know when you talk about teams like Baltimore, Arizona, moving up, who could you move up for? I don't think you have to move up for Lamar Jackson. So if you like him, you can probably sit and get him if you want to go at that position. If you want to go up and get one of the top 4 guys, they can't do that because they're going to go off the board so quickly. So I think it's either if you like Jackson, you take him. If you don't, and you do want a quarterback, if anything, you want to move back a little bit.
Staying with Lamar Jackson, I've been reading a lot of articles the last week or two about him possibly moving up a couple teams' draft boards and possibly being now a real first-round option at quarterback. You got Saints that recently reportedly worked him out. I like that fit with Sean Payton. What do you think?
Well, I think it would be a good fit more than Sean Payton, the fact that he would be able to sit and learn and he wouldn't be forced to play right away, because I think that's a player that would it would help him a lot to be in a situation where he doesn't have to play right away, because I do think he's raw, and I do think he's going to need a little bit of time to develop, and there's probably not a better quarterback to learn under than Drew Brees. So from that perspective, yeah, I think that would be a good situation. I think a worse situation would be to go to a team where he'd be forced to play right away. And you could say that about a lot of young quarterbacks.
So what have you seen from him personally, John? I mean, with his pro day, he didn't run the 40. The combine didn't run the 40, but he's done a lot of quarterback drills. To you, has he looked better than what you've seen maybe on tape when he was in college?
No, I mean, I don't think you learn that much from pro days or the combine as far as the football part of it.
Well, I mean,
that's
more of his
where
mechanics. His mechanics, like more of his footwork.
Yeah,
that was the question
the accuracy part of it is the biggest issue. With not only Jackson, Josh Allen would be in that category as well. A lot of young quarterbacks, because of the way they play the game at the college level. There seems to be always mechanical problems. So I think, NFL teams are starting to realize. I think the Rams were the best at it last year when they moved away from Jeff Fisher, brought in Sean McVay. They were able to rescue sort of Jared Goff, who had terrible mechanics, and sort of get him going in the right direction. So I think part of that is built in. He's got some issues. You got to fix some issues, but you can say that about everybody, not named Quentin Nelson or Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, John, one thing on Jackson, it seems that, you talk about some people early in the process weren't even really considering him a quarterback. Is that kind of off the table, that basically now everybody has said that this guy, you think he's going to be a first-round pick, which would, to me, say that everybody has to consider him to be a quarterback at this stage of the game, which, if a team takes him in the first round, you would think they're taking him as a quarterback, right?
Yeah, no question. He's not. I mean, that was overblown. What happens at the combine is somebody could put in a request for a player to sort of work out at a different position
right.
than what he's known for. And that request was made for Jackson. It could have been one team. It could have been more than one team. It's it depends how you look at it. I know a lot of people. You could spin it in a favorable way. They say, he's such a great athlete. They want to see what he would be able to do as a receiver. I have yet to see any team talk about him as anything other than a quarterback, and I think that was much ado about nothing.
John, obviously you talked yesterday about the 6 wide receivers. What's the next best position, do you think, in this year's draft?
As far as I think, more of the bad part, I think this is a bad receiver draft, and that strikes out at me. As far as and also edge rusher, those are the 2 positions where
weaker. If
you need one of those, you better get them early. I think the other position, I think offensive line, specifically interior offensive line, and it starts with Nelson, but there's a number of good centers. You don't think about centers going in the first round very often. I think you could have 2 potential first-round picks at center with Price from Ohio State, Daniels from Iowa.
Interesting.
And then the interior, as I said, not only Quentin Nelson, who's off the charts as an offensive guard, but also guys like Isaiah Wynn, Will Hernandez, just very, very deep on the interior of the offensive line.
All right, we'll talk more about the draft as it approaches April 26th. You can listen to that draft right here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow John on Twitter at JF McMullen. John, you the man, pal.
Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.